folks, it's about time for our class. Hi, Robin. Glad you're here this morning. What a beautiful morning it is. I wanted to first, before we begin, let's go to Proverbs Chapter 6 before we get into our lesson. Past couple of weeks, I've been reading through Proverbs, and it's just amazing to me how much is said about how human beings can get themselves into trouble by what they say. This morning when I was reading the Bible, Sherry was next to me. We were sitting in our chairs, and I turned to her and I said, the Old Testament, parts of it are at least 3,000 years old. And it's funny how human nature doesn't change. The same things that got people into trouble way back then are the same things that get people in trouble today. So, in that sense, there hasn't been a whole lot of improvement. And we've had the book of Proverbs, how long? For a long time. And we've had, wisdom's been around, but not a whole lot of people seek wisdom. So if I kind of recount in my life when I got in trouble, of course, I've gotten in trouble by doing things, but a lot of times I found myself in fisticuffs by something that I said, So I think one of the biggest challenges, and the Bible makes this pretty well an important idea, that the most unruly part of our bodies, metaphorically speaking, is the tongue. And you recall what James says about it. It's like a fire that sets a flame, a forest, a great forest. And so the mouth, our words, if we're to learn wisdom, then it's important for us to realize the power that we have for good or for evil. It's on the tip of our tongue. And in the book of Proverbs, just the first part, Proverbs 6, it's interesting to me the emphasis that's placed on our speech. And so I wanted to use this sort of as a prequel in a sense to what we're going to talk about in the Sermon on the Mount, because I think it forms a foundation. The message that Jesus gives in the Sermon on the Mount about the tongue and our speech and about the problems we have is not a new thing, okay? It's rooted in the teachings that have been around for a very long time that everybody is familiar with and knows it. But what Jesus does is he re-amplifies what's always been there. And then he explains the fuller idea of why God put it there. So when you get to the phrase, as we will in the Sermon on the Mount, you've heard that it has been said, okay, and he'll quote the tradition of the elders and things of that nature, and then he will say, and I say unto you. When Jesus says, I say unto you, he's speaking from the perspective of being God. And the message and the things that he said is really not new, because it's rooted in God's word all along. It's this, that human beings like to um, keep the letter of the law, or they look at the law as some, it's a black and white thing, and you can come up close to the thou shalt not, okay, as long as you don't go across, right? So you can come up to it, and that's always the discussion. It's human beings like to rationalize what is the line. Okay. If I know the line, then I know the parameters of how far I can get to it, without getting hurt, so to speak, or crossing that line between, what's actual sin or whatever. But that's not the intent of the law. The intent of the law was not to give you a boundary that you can get close to without crossing it. That's not the intent of the law. The intent of the law is to make known what is not to be done, okay? But it seems to me that God had the understanding, or God presumed. Let me say that. Of course, I'm presuming. I'm being presumptuous, okay? Just for the sake of argument. I think God, or let me illustrate. God presumed that human beings would learn the spirit of the law and what that would mean and how that would guide. Does that make sense? No? Okay. Let's read Proverbs 6, and I think it'll get clearer. God has a better way of explaining it than me. Okay. He says, my son, if you have become surety for your neighbor, have given a pledge for a stranger, if you have been snared with the words of your mouth, have been caught with the words of your mouth, do this, my son, and deliver yourself. Since you have come into the hand of your neighbor, go humble yourself and importune your neighbor. Do not give sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's hand, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. In regard to what he's talking about, of how, he's talking about a person who rashly gives a pledge on behalf of someone else without thinking, and now they're trapped in a snare. Maybe they didn't think about the consequence or the bigger, issue at stake, and maybe they are not able to meet the obligation they had promised to do. So they're in trouble because of their words. What's the exhortation from the book of Proverbs? Okay. Yes. Quickly. Like a gazelle. I've seen the History Channel sometimes, and I've seen animal shows, and I've seen a gazelle run, and they're fast. And so it's kind of like, be speedy to ask for forgiveness or to make things right and explain, or else what may happen. Anything? If you don't, and you're not fulfilling what you promised to do, the longer it goes unfulfilled, how do you suppose the one to whom you made the surety or the promise to is going to react? I'll give you a scenario. I was young once, and I took out a lot of little, what are those, shark loans, you go and you pay like 27, 30% interest, in my younger days. And and you find out, now you owe, the payment plus the interest. And as a college student, I didn't have any money anyway, and I realized this is if I don't pay anything, man, this is going to be like $1 million later because the interest stacked onto this $1,000 that I got. Okay, it was a big deal, and so I didn't pay it, and guess what started to happen? Guess who found me? Who was it? Who found me? I was surprised how they found me so quickly. The one company in whom I was indebted to, the creditor, they found me. And guess how they treated me? They didn't care I was a college student. Well, I don't have any money. They didn't care. You owe this, And they badgered me, and they scared me, and I ended up, going to my mom and dad and tell them the situation, and we got to pay it off. But I learned a lesson there that was taught in Proverbs, right? Now they may not have done anything if I'd have gone to them earlier and said, "Look, I've made a mistake." But the issue is it's a principle that's involved. The exhortations about guarding our words, I think, implies the idea that we think before we, lunge forward in our speech. And it's the idea of understanding why the prohibition is given. In any prohibition, in any law that's given, there's an intent behind it. There's a big reason. But human beings focus on the line, about, how far till I cross. And God never meant for us to walk near the cliff of the abyss, to put ourselves. We don't understand the law and its intent if that's what we're doing in regard to these big things of life. Let's continue. He says, let's see, I want to go down to verse 12. A worthless person, a wicked man, is the one who walks with a what? What do you have? A perverse or false mouth. And then he describes what he's talking about. He says, who winks with his eyes. You say something and you go, to the other person, this is as old as antiquity. And, wink, wink type of thing. He points with his fingers. We might kind of cross our fingers behind our back, things like that. That's what's being talked about. It reminds me of a of a baseball coach or a football coach giving signals to the team. You've seen them on the sideline. What do? They're doing all kinds of things. Well, at some point they come to the sign that everybody knows, okay? But they do all this stuff, and let's say this is what the sign is, do this. And every team member knows it, so he's going, See, he does it, and everybody, oh, okay, we're going to run this play, or I need to steal this base, or whatever. The problem is, when you think about it, that kind of thing happens between human beings with their words. Now, we're not overtly going like this, but it's kind of like we say things we don't mean. We make promises that we don't intend to keep, crossing fingers. We do those kinds of things. That's what's being described here. He says, with the perversity in his heart devises evil continually, who spreads what? What do you have? Strife, discord, good words. What is strife or discord? How do you spread strife or discord? Gossip, um, you know, when you're in front of someone or when you're around the person, they're the greatest person in all the world. That's how you communicate. But then you go over here and you talk to somebody else, friends, and I can't. I despise that person. You know, did you hear what happened? You know what they did? You know, things like that. And so what you're doing is you're spreading rippling of strife and discord. You're not bringing things together. You're causing, you know, other things to happen. Those things naturally divide and cause consternation. If the other person found out about it, this is one of the things that I've tried to learn is I know that if I talk about someone behind their back in a negative way, okay, there's others doing the same about me. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. You know, I never think about that, though, because I'm the one engaging, talking, you know, behind someone's back. I don't contemplate that, you know what, I shouldn't do this. I'm actually supporting this kind of activity. And if I think about it, I wouldn't want anybody to be talking about me behind my back about things, you know, or this is not saying we can't talk about each other and others, but it shouldn't descend into what? This negative diatribe or consternation, hateful speech about people, which people love to do. And maybe the reason people love to do it is that's the way we build ourselves up as being better than others. If we can find fault in others, it makes us look what? Better. But the problem is you're being torn down by the other person so they can think that they look better in relationship to their friends. So you see the cycle. It's bad. It's really bad. This is why I'm not a fan of social media. I think there's good things about it, but I just don't want to participate. And it's strange because in the position that I am, I should be, I guess, but I don't. Verse 15, therefore his calamity will come suddenly. Instantly he will be broken and there will be no healing. There are 6 things which the Lord hates. Yea, 7 are an abomination. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. 3 of those have to do with what? The mouth. 3 of them have to do with the mouth. Overtly with the mouth. So James says your tongue can set a forest aflame, and it can. In fact, sometimes something that someone says, the person might respond with an unforgivable spirit toward an individual. Never in their lifetime will they forgive you for what you said. And it will be something that's drudged up. I mean, it's to their own hurt too, you know, but they will remember. They will bring it up. And you'll always be that person. Now, you can't help the consequences. You can try, though, to settle it what? Quickly. So, this is where the idea, I think, comes from becoming bitter, hurt. The more it lingers and festers in the heart of the individual, in the mind of the individual, the more difficult it becomes for us in reconciliation. And it's more difficult for the person until they let it go and forgive. So, I wanted to say all that now to go to Matthew chapter 5, because this is what I think is the foundation of what we're seeing happening here in the Sermon on the Mount. Not that Jesus is directly referring to the book of Proverbs. There's other places that, it's all of it together. It's just the teaching. And there's so much about the mouth and teaching that's talked about in the Bible. So, I'm in Mark 5. I want Matthew 5. So let's read, beginning in verse, 21. In this, the Beatitudes start, sort of the core principles, ideas. Then Jesus does a contrast type of section when he talks about what you've heard, but what I say. And Jesus is explaining the mechanisms, if you please, behind the law, behind the things God has given, the Spirit, the reason, what it protects us from. Not that we go in and we learn what the laws say so we don't break them. That's how amateurish we are in regard to being Christians. We're not mature, because that's not the purpose, just to give you a boundary. The purpose is to redirect our thinking. It's like, if the boundary is here, why would we be moving toward it? Why would we live life close to it? It should really be the opposite. If we actually followed the teachings of Jesus, we wouldn't even need any laws. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. God knows, if you fully understood that, you would not participate in that which would violate that relationship you have with God. And it's not like you need to be told what not to do. There is a point at which one's conscience can be seared, but God has given a conscience to people. And the violation of the conscience means you had a conscience, but you keep violating it, so it becomes like petrified. That's how the Hebrew writer talks about it. You can violate it so much. What is the conscience? It's kind of like, it's the ought. I know I ought not to do this, but you violate it. I know I ought not to do this. So you do it. I shouldn't do it. You do it. So your conscience is telling you. God's given us a conscience. That's why the Gentiles, they had the law of conscience. They didn't have the Jewish law. They had the law of conscience. The evidence behind the law of conscience was God's existence being revealed in what? Nature. So, you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder. Do not kill. You shall not commit murder. And whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. Well, that seems rational enough. That's sort of our laws too. Don't murder. Okay? Or else what? The idea is you will be, arrested, and justice would be administered. That's the principle. That's the governing principle of every civilization, actually. The ancient Babylonians, Sumerians, whatever you have, you can read in certain artifacts laws that are similar to the biblical laws because they are common sense. God's given a conscience. People know innately it's wrong to murder. Some have their conscience seared, and so that line is not as strong as it should be because of the continual suppressing of the truth and of the conscience. So he says this, but I say unto you that everyone who is what? Everyone who is angry. Now, as far as I know, anger is not the same thing as murder. Is it? What does it say? But I said to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. Why is anger, Jesus said, a reason to be arrested, taken to the court? Now you have to understand what he's doing. All right, you know the law, right? Don't kill, don't murder. You'll be liable to the, justice would be administered. Jesus says, but I say unto you, this is God talking. Now he's backing away more. He's saying you got your eyes focused on this law, thou shalt not kill, which is a good law. But, there are steps to get to that point. There are kind of like road signs. I remember in one illustration I saw one time in reading, and I don't know if this is still true or not, but some of you who have gone to Niagara Falls, has anybody gone there? I know my wife's been there a long time ago, but okay. Did you get on a boat or anything? Okay. Are there signs that have warnings that you're getting to the falls? If you're up before the falls, there's some signs, and I don't remember if this was exactly right, but I remember that the sign was to point at no return. So I don't know if it's still there or it was made up for illustration purposes. But I do probably suspect there are some warning signs. There's a point to where you cross it or that you go that you can't avoid going over the fall. There has to be some point at which you're being pulled. And it's like the current pulls you. And you could try to paddle and get out, jump out and try to swim, and you're going backwards, going to fall off that cliff, right? So the movement accelerates the closer you get to what? The fall? The tug? Now, if someone is way up here floating on the river, the water, it's in an inner tube, you're just kind of, floating around, everything's peaceful. Then all of a sudden, you get into a point to where it's like a magnet. And then there's a point to where it's just, you're being sucked in. Do you see what's happening in regard to what Jesus is saying? So why would he talk about anger? What does anger do to people? Yeah. That anger. But, all right. Yeah, anger can lead you, if it's not dealt with, to a place that would be terrible, murder. Okay? But on its way to there, even if it never arrives there, it can cause a lot of damage. Can it not? All right. Then Jesus says, he even takes it a step further. And whoever shall say to his brother, Raca, will be guilty before the Supreme Court. What is that? An empty head, a no good for nothing individual. Why would anybody say, to wag, you no good, da-da-da-da-da-da human being? Who would say something like that? What's the problem with that? If one has that attitude towards somebody, then what is at risk? Do you think you'd have any problem in disparaging that individual? You think you had any problem of sowing discord around, trying to hurt that individual, doing something intentionally? No, you wouldn't. If you're looking at them that way, they are nothing to me. That's what it is. You know, sometimes at home we play around, jokingly, rocka, rocka. But it's a slam of showing one's opinion of a person. Then he backs up. Okay, so you got anger, the view of an individual, worthless fellow, and then you back up and you got this word fool. And I don't think the word fool is being used like, fool has said in his heart, there is no God. I think this is describing an attitude of our decision or how we're viewing an individual. It's not to the point of raka, but it's going in that direction. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of like it's a progression. So when Jesus says you feel you're guilty enough to go into the fire of hell, if therefore you are presenting your offering at the altar, this is engaged in a religious, spiritual activity. Okay, you've come to offer sacrifice. There, remember that a brother has something against you. Now, you may have caused that brother to have something against you. You're aware of it. Maybe you gave a pledge, a promise. They heard that you said something about them. You spread something that was false about them. Whatever the consternation is on the part of the other party, you remember they have aught against you. Then leave your offering there before the altar and go your way. First be what? Reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. You mean that's even precedence over my worship? Yeah, that's what he says. But I would think you're violating the second command next to the one. That's why it's so important. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You hadn't shown love to your neighbor. There's some reason that the neighbor has aught against you. I think that's the presumption. You remember. Your conscience is telling you that there's some kind of wedge that is there that needs to be dealt with. How can you not love your neighbor and then think you can come and love God? One flows from the other. So that's telling us that you don't really love God if you're not doing the other. Because he says, leave your offering there and go get reconciled. Now, maybe there's no reconciliation, but you did what? You made the effort. You did it. I can remember facing this for the very first time and being consciously hit with a conscience about it and doing something about it. So, you've got the thou shalt not, but Jesus is backing up and saying, we don't have to worry about the thou shalt nots when you think about it. If you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, love your neighbor as yourself, why do I need to be told thou shalt not kill? Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not lie, bear false witness. Why do I need to be told these things? I don't. That's the whole point of what Jesus is saying. The law is given. Everybody's focused on the law. What is murder? It's kind of like Jesus when he talks about adultery. Everybody's wanting to define, well, what exactly is adultery? If the wife burns your toast in the morning, this is the arguments that are going on back then. Okay, which is, it's just pathetic how the men are trying to rationalize and adjudicate, yeah, it's fine. I could put her away because I was offended by this offensive thing, and I had the right to do it. Now, what's pathetic is Deuteronomy 24, God allowed certain things because of the hardness of the what? The heart. In other words, God recognized the immaturity and the amateur way people were looking at things. And in the allowance in Deuteronomy 24 concerning marriage, divorce, and remarriage, there's still a stipulation in there that was a difficult thing. But when the disciples were talking about reasons for divorce, Jesus is talking about reasons of marriage, staying married. So see how we focus on things that are sometimes less than spiritual? That's what we do sometimes in our debates, I think. You know, we have a position, and I'm not saying anything against debating. If David was here, he would argue with me. You know, he's a debater. But we wouldn't have issues in the church regarding marriage, divorce, and remarriage as we do, and as we fight about, and as we divide over, you know, this and that, if we were loving God with our whole soul and mind and loving our neighbor as ourselves. We would do things to enhance our marriage relationship. That is, to me, what we would be involved in. Now, that's the idea, or I should say the ideal. And I know things are not always ideal. That's why there's an exception. But doesn't it make sense? There's always a push to bring gambling into the state. You know, more states are getting gambling, you know, lottery and things of that nature. And it sounds good from a financial thing, you know, because it brings so much money. Think we could take a certain percentage of the gambling proceeds and it can go to our schools. That's how it's always sold. What parent, what person is going to be opposed to that? It's always couched that way, you know, how it's going to enhance. What are the underlying issues? Does the issue of loving neighbor as yourself have any impact on the idea of gambling? Who are the ones that gamble? The ones who least can afford to gamble. Why? Because they have been sold on an idea that they could be the next millionaire. What are the odds? The odds. I mean, somebody will. And so no one ever considers the odds because there's always a winner, right? No one considers the odds, but how many people played? How many people lost money? How many people had their paycheck? They have a family. And they go for that possibility. So I'm not sure that it's a loving thing to do, is the principle that I'm working from. Everything else looks fine, you know. But that's what's always shown. The underside's never shown. And so someone comes in to buy a chance. And someone will win, and they'll give inspiration to millions to play it. But if we love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves, we have to take into consideration the impact upon our neighbor. That, to me, is the strongest argument. Of course, it's coming from a biblical. I think it's not only biblical. I think it's just human nature. I think that people don't want others to be hurt. We're just thinking about the extra money to come into the government or, to the schools. So, that's enough about that. But he says, leave your offering there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and present your offering. 25, make friends quickly with the opponent at law while you are with him on the way. Now, things were done differently in antiquity. Processes and things of this nature. But he says, don't waste time. Here you got the guy going to the court. He's all mad. He's going. And, and you see him pass your house. You jump out and you start walking with him. Wait, man, I want to tell you I'm sorry about this. What can I do? Can I, make friends with the person while you're in the way. Make friends quickly. Because when he gets there, the deal is signed. You're going to be called into court, and it may proceed to harsher punishments. Okay, let's take the principle. I've said something about someone, and they have found out about it through a series of people who ultimately told them. I'm in my office at Faulkner, and I see the window, and I see that individual. He's storming to the president's office. I see him. I jump out of my chair. I run out there, and I just beg for forgiveness. I'm sorry. I throw myself at his mercy. I might can change his heart. And, buddy, I've learned a lesson because my position is at risk. It could be a negative impact. Do you see what I'm talking about? See the principle that's involved? So, the law states refrain from acts of murder. That's what's stated. You have heard that it was said, the 10 Commandments forbid murder. Justice will be dispensed when murder is committed. Murder is a horrible crime against humanity. We all know that. Okay, duh. He says the intent of the law, refrain from nurturing the roots of hostility. But I say unto you, so he talks about our words, how they can lead to things. The roots of hostility are revealed in what we think and by what we say. Serious crimes are often committed against the faith community. James 4 has a deep discussion about anger that's fueled by brothers and sisters. The idea that if we continue to bite and devour one another, don't be surprised if you do what? Consume one another. So here I am, I have here's Terry Carlisle, and I'm cutting him up with my words, getting my fork, and, pretty soon he's gone. The picture is interesting. You're biting and devouring. Pretty soon, Terry Carlisle's what? He's dead to you. The spirit of the law. Jesus, the spirit of the law. The intent, refrain from nurturing anything that would lead in that direction. The intent of the law is pursue reconciliation. That's what Jesus wants us to focus on. Pursue reconciliation as quick as possible. You be the one to initiate and settle disputes. You be the one who quickly does it. Failing to do otherwise will be detrimental. And you don't know how bad it might be. People have lost their jobs. People have lost their marriage. People have lost their friends, their kids, by things that have been thought and said. Right? Absolutely. Okay. Now that everybody's thinking positive about me, man, I feel the energy. I'm excited today. All right. That's it.